Yes, hello people. The Bashar people here in Norway where I live are really starting to look at more buggy racing cars, 110 scale. So I decided to buy a team associated, is it called 74.1? That's a 4-wheel drive 110 scale buggy. So I have ordered that on the local RC shop here where I live. But Team Associated have just released the 74.2 edition of that car. And two of the Bashers have got that already. I'm still waiting for that one. Then I also felt that since if I first gonna start to drive on these racer tracks, I maybe should have two cars, because the tracks are a bit away from where I live. So I have to drive my car for about 40 to 50 minutes to get to the RC tracks. So it would be nice to have two cars, because if you come to the tracks and you break something and you don't have the parts, you cannot drive. So it would be easy to have at least a spare car. So I decided to also get a two-wheel drive car. So I bought this TLR or Team Losi Racing 22 DC50 Elite. And this is two-wheel drive also. This is a kit car, so you have to build it and install all electronics. I'm not started with that yet. But then, looking on the internet there in Norway, I found this Team Associated B6.2 two-wheel drive car, used for a very good price, around $330 US. And it comes with all the electronics. Let's see. So it comes with ESC, and this is the HobbyWing XR10 Pro 160 ampere ESC that are used a lot in these competition racers 110 scale. But this is the first editions of the ESC. They now have a second edition out, but there's not that much big difference that I'm aware of. And it also have a nice reedy servo and a nice reedy 6.5 turn brushless censored engine motor. So I also bought this with some batteries. It also comes with some batteries. The only thing I had to buy was a receiver and transponder. You are using the transponder so you get round lapse time, what they call it, when you're driving on the track. So you can get, for each pass, you have the timing, so you know the timing of each laps. And that is used in competition, but it's also very nice to have in practice, because you can get on your mobile phone, you can get the lapse times when you're driving, so you can hear if you are driving fast or slowing and what your timing is. So this is a two-wheel drive, and you can see here it has slipper pads here, so nothing goes to the front. You have only steering in the front. This car also have some upgrades, and I'm not really sure what upgrades it have. I think the shocks are maybe upgraded to something like what it's called, concept. And I also see he has carbon fiber shock towers, and I believe it's maybe what they called again, titanium links. And he has also done something with the bulkhead or front part here. I also heard that was some of the weak parts on this car, so you maybe should change that. And I see he's gone for the brass bulkhead, what they call it here. Yes, so there are some upgrades. And if you look at the chassis here, there's almost no mark on it at all, so it's very little used, this car. So as I said, I bought this car used, so if you are getting into RC and want to also drive and with some other people on racing tracks, maybe also competitions, you don't have to buy all new. If you have bought this car new with all the electronics, the price would maybe have been $700, $800 or something. But as I said, I got this for just about a little something over $300. Also, you don't have to use the best ESC, especially if you are just driving for fun. I think you are allowed to use cheaper ESCs. But if you are driving in competition, you maybe have to have an ESC that's have what they call the Blinky mode. That says that you have 0 timing on the ESC. I think also it's called Blinky because it will blink in some color. Like you can see, it will flash in some colors. So you can easily see that the ESC is really in Blinky mode. But I heard that in competition mode, like competitions, you are allowed to have timing on the motor. So I'm not sure what about this stock classes when you have stock ESC and stock motor, and you see sometimes you have competitions. What are they using is a 13.5 turn engines and 70.5 turns engines. But if you can set up these engines have maybe the timing is set and hard set on the engine, so it's not possible to change the timing on the motor itself. And then if it's also Blinky, you cannot, you don't have 0 timing on the ESC. The whole point of this is because when you're setting some higher timing on the motor or ESC, you can get some higher speed on the car. But in competition, it's maybe a big point that the drivers should really have cars that have about the same speed, maximum speed. So it's just your driving skills, how you use the brake, throttle and steering, that's decide who's the best driver. And that sounds yeah, reasonable for me. But now we're going to change a few settings on this ESC here. And to do that, I have to use this HobbyWing multifunction LCD program box. So I'm just gonna put it in here. Let's see if I can get it in like that. I turn on the car. Now it's reading the values from the ESC that's already set. And here I did a quick test run with this car yesterday. You can see that in my previous video. And I got maximum speed to 58 km/h, and that's perfect for me. But it had a bit too much punch or acceleration on the bottom and a bit too strong brakes. So I'm gonna adjust a few settings only. So here we have the settings that's possible to set. I'm not gonna repeat all of this. You're gonna see later in the video where I'm going through how I'm now set up this ESC and how I'm probably gonna set up the cheaper other ESC. So here we have running mode, reverse force, cut off voltage, right? Yes, motor control, remote off, sensor, throttle rate, yes, neutral rate, code, right. This is the first thing I'm gonna change. It's called drive frequency here. In the user manual they say it's called throttle frequency PWM value. And if you lower this to a lower value, you will get a bit higher acceleration. And if you raise it, it will be a bit more smooth on the low bottom. So I'm gonna raise this to 12K. Save that. And the other thing I wanted was to set down the brakes. Let's see if I can find that. Brake brakes 10%, that's okay. Brake force, I set it to 100%, because you can set it like this and you can lower it in the transmitter. You just lower the reverse travel so you get less brakes. But it was too high yesterday, and I want to set it down to 85, what this is. Let's see. I set it to 87.5. And again, this would be also too much, but you can set it down in the transmitter. That's more easy, so you don't have to go into the ESC and program that every time. So now I think I've set everything I wanted. And when that's done, you just turn off the ESC. So now I changed my ESC setup. Look on YouTube, just search for Bruno HobbyWing, and you'll find his video where he explains all the settings for this HobbyWing XR10 Pro, and he gives a lot of good information there. I only tested this car once with this ESC, so I'm not expert at all. I'm used to other ESCs when I'm using my passion cars, and they have not this many settings. But I think I now have an okay setup in the ESC for me as a beginner. But as you're getting better, you maybe want to change some of the settings so you can get that. Yeah, that's a bit faster speed, sometimes maximum high speed or stronger brakes or whatever you would like. It was a bit surprising to see that they are using drag brake, but I understand, and Mr. Bruno explains that because when you come like on a long run on a racing track and you have a quick turn at the end, you just let off the throttle, and when you let off the throttle and when it's in neutral, the drag brakes will kick in. And if you have drag brakes set at a quite low level, like 10 or 15, around there, the car will slow down automatically, and we come into the corner on low speed when you have drag brakes and you don't have throttle, so you have the throttle on neutral, and you start to turn, the car will turn a bit sharper. But you have to experience that yourself. You could try, of course, just complete it, set the drag brake at 0, just see how the cars behave, and later you can try to raise it to 15 or something like that and see if you like that. Now that's really how you should do it. Drive the car and experience, and change the values and tuning and see how it behaves and what's best suited for you. Alright, this is a carpet edition of this Timo Associated B6.2. So it's set up for carpet and even ground, high traction also. That means it's typically set up with quite low ground clearance. I think it's 16 millimeters now. So you get a low center of gravity, and what they call a roll center, that is not that far away from the center of gravity, so the car should not, you will not get this traction rolling. Traction rolling is when you're driving on a carpet where you have very good traction, when the wheels are very grabbing, very hard to the carpet, you know, and the car could get stuck in a turn and turn over. But when you have set it up like this, you will get less of that. Also, you should, of course, one of the most important things is to have the right wheels. So if you have wheels that have way too much traction, you should maybe find some wheels that have less traction. And some people start to modify their wheels. They cut off some of the edges here too, so it's not really grab that hard to the carpet when you're turning. Also, some people say that if you have wheels that's been used a bit, so they are not that very grippy, they can maybe run smoother on high traction tracks like carpet or asphalt. But I just have to test that myself. But the easy way to do it, if you're going into racing, competition racing, I think, buy a car, used or new, or whatever you have money for. Go budget if it's what you have to do. It's I found this very little driven car for a very good price with electronics. So you should look for something like that. You don't have to have the latest editions of the car, really. I don't see that's only for the pro people, the pro drivers that can take benefits of the latest features. For me, this car will be fast and good enough. Of course it will be. But then if you build a car yourself, or you buy a used car, just check that it's set up like what they call kit setup. That was how they suggest you should set up the car. And just make sure that if you're driving on carpet or asphalt or some high traction tracks, set up the car for that condition. And typically you will have the right type of tires for that traction, and you have the ground clearance set up. So you don't set up, when I'm driving a carpet, I will not have a car that's set up with really high ground clearance. You set it up with low ground clearance, but then if you're driving on dirt, you will have a bit higher ground clearance because the track is more uneven. So just check that it's set up like it should, like the kit setup, and then you can see setup sheets from other pro drivers and see how they modify the car some. And just start driving the car and see how it behaves, and do small modifications as you feel it's needed. The most important things to modify is the wheels, the tires, more or less grip. Also you have to check if it's dry or wet conditions and change tires after what you need for that. And the next important thing is the ground clearance, and you adjust that with just adjusting the shock and springs are. You can maybe change to some stiffer springs if you feel that. And there's what I would start with, really. Not have to be too complicated. I know also people are starting to change the sway bars. You can see we have sway bars here, both in the rear and in the front, really, in this car. So you get a bit more stiff car, and you can also change the oil in the shocks and also the diff oil in the diff. This car have only one gear diff in the rear, since it's a two-wheel drive car. And then you just have to do small adjustments or other things you want to adjust, but I'm not the expert on racing and setup of the cars. And of course also very important also is the camber and toe. So usually you set up the camber so that the wheels are a bit going to the inside when going up, so the top of the wheels are 1 degree angle to the inside. That's both on the rear and the front. Usually that's a alright beginning setup, I think. And also in the front you maybe set up the car to have a bit outward toe, also about 1 degree outward. That will give you a bit sharper turns, they say. Yes, so that's all. I'm gonna come back later with maybe when I start to building this Team Losi car, and I start to drive this car more on the carpet track. So that's all I have to say. Thanks. These are the settings that I'm using now for my HobbyWing XR10 Pro ESC. But beware that the settings here are based on some of the things that Mr. Bruno Pro Racer are suggesting, and other things that I more want to have, because some of these settings are very personal or more specific to how you want the car and throttle or brakes to behave. So very faster running mode, I use forward reverse with brake. That's because when I'm practicing and I'm new, I like to have reverse. If not, you have to go down and pick up the car very often. But in competition, you're only allowed to use forward with brake. Max reverse force 25. Cutoff voltage, I have set that to auto. ESC thermal protection is 105 degrees Celsius. Motor thermal protection I've set to disabled because I don't have a connection thermal sensor to the motor, so I cannot read that off with the ESC. Back voltage I've set to 7 volt because my servo can take 6 volt and it can also take 7.4 volt, but I feel that it's fast enough and strong enough on 6 volt, so just to be a bit easy on the servo I've set it to 6 volt. If I later feel I need a bit faster servo and stronger, I will raise it again to 7.4 volt. Remote off I set to disabled. That is just that you can turn off the ESC by holding the maximum reverse on a transmitter for 6 seconds or more. I don't need that, I feel. Sensor mode is full censored. Throttle rate control I set to 15. And this setting, Mr. Bruno says, is very important because these settings will give you the feel of the throttle so you can drive more consistent, especially when jumping, so that you're not jumping too long or too short. So try this setting about 15, maybe up to 20. It's the response, how responsive the throttle will be. If you set it to 30, you will have very high response. If you set it to 1, I guess you will have very slow response. So about 15 to 20 is what Bruno is suggesting. Throttle curve, a linear neutral range is 6, coast 0, PWM drive frequency I've raised up to 12k. A low value here will give you a more higher bottom acceleration, you could say, or what we are used to in the basher cars we call punch, and a higher value will give you a bit slower response, but with more control, you could say. So Bruno says that on carpet you can use a lower value, and on dirt you could use a higher value. I tried it yesterday, the car, and I had it on 8k here. And I felt the acceleration in the bottom was a bit high, so I now went up to 12k. Yes, softening value 0, and softening range is also 0. Drag brake, I set that to 10, and that because when you drop the throttle to neutral, you have a little bit brake, and that could give you some sharper turns on low speed, say Mr. Bruno. And I tested it like this yesterday, and I felt it was okay. Maybe also if you don't have drag brake at all, maybe the car will roll very long when you drop the throttle to neutral. So yes, set it at 10, but you should maybe not set it very high because it will build up some heat and take some power. So keep it on a low value like 10 or 15 or something like that. Max brake force I set to 87.5 now. I tried it yesterday with 100%, but I think the brakes was a bit too high. But what you really do, also in a transmitter, you go in and set down maximum reverse in the transmitter. So you set the brakes high in the ESC and you fine tune it in the transmitter. So in the transmitter I have lowered the reverse travel to about 50%. So that's how you keep the brakes down, so you don't have that very strong brakes. And it's more easy to just fine tune in a transmitter, so you don't have to go into the ESC and do changes. Initial brake force should be drag brake. Brake rate control I have to 20. Brake curve is linear. Brake frequency is 1K. Brake control is traditional. Boost timing, I've set up this ESC with 0 timing boost because I'm a beginner track racer, and I don't need very high speed. I measured a car yesterday to 58 kilometers per hour, and that's more enough for me racing on these quite small racing tracks with many sharp turns. You just have typically one longer part of the track where you can get up to some speed, but then around 50 kilometers per hour, maybe up to 60 kilometers per hour is fast enough. And when you have the timing low, the engine should keep cooler. So I have boost timing 0 and boost timing activation is auto. That's just so I don't have to set the next two ones. That's start RPM and boost and RPM. So no answer here or nothing set there really. Turbo timing, that's just the maximum timing you get on the very top when you have maximum throttle. That also is set to 0 because I'm not using any boost timing or turbo timing. And then also the three last ones means nothing really, but I just set them to values that Mr. Bruno suggested in his video. So maybe later, if I'm getting better to drive the car and I feel that I can use a bit more higher speed on some of the longer runs, I can go in and set up the boost timing and maybe also turbo timing later, but I not feel the need for any of that now. So that's how I set up this ESC. But I just have this ESC in one of my cars. In the two other cars I will have another much cheaper ESC. Let's see what the settings is for that ESC. You don't have to buy the expensive HobbyWing XR10 Pro ESC that's most of the racers are using. But if you really want that, I think you can buy the first edition of that ESC, and that is what I have in my car that I bought used. The price for the first edition you can still find, I believe, and it's about $100. The latest edition is over $200. But you can also buy this much cheaper ESC, the QuickRun 10 BL 120 amp ESC. So that this one I'm gonna use for two other one scale racer cars, and I'm gonna use this with a 10.5 turn brushless motor, and this is also a sensored ESC, so you will get that fine control in the low speed range. But we will see here that this ESC have a lot less or less options to set, so it will maybe be easier to control or set up. Let's see now. So we have for this QuickRun, HobbyWing QuickRun, we have running mode again, and you will set this up as for competition you only have allowed to use forward brake, but for practicing I will have forward, reverse and brake. And you also have drag brake here, so I will try to set that also at 10% there. Low voltage cutoff, it says the default of 3.0 volt per cell. So I'm maybe going to rise that to 3.2 volt per cell. Even could maybe even try 3.4. That just to make sure that the battery is not getting too low. And start punch mode. When you have very high grip like carpet, you don't need very high punch. So the default value is 7. I will maybe set that down to 3 or 4. Try that. Then you have, it says here that it's max drag brake force, but in the, when you read it, they're talking more about it's like the max brake force. So I think that's okay to be at 75. Again, you can set down the reverse travel or brakes in the transmitter and fine tune it there. Yes, maximum reverse forcing, that's just when going the speed of the reverse, so that's okay to 25. Initial brake force, you should set this to equals drag brake force. So when you drop the throttle to neutral, you will have this maybe this 10% drag brake. The default value here says 0, but when you read farther down, you will see that it says that it's really equal drag brake force. So a bit strange, maybe something's not written right in this user manual. Throttle range 9%, I think that will be okay. And timing, again, I will just try first with 0-degree timing. Later you could maybe try to rise it a bit if you want a bit higher speed. But you should always then check the engine temperature and ESC temperature. So if you start to mess with the timing on the motor, if you can adjust the timing on the motor itself and also the timing on the ESC, make sure that you do some do some test runs and measure the temperature on both the ESC battery and the motor. Also maybe the slipper pads or something like that, because the motor and the ESC should really not get over 80 degrees Celsius. So you should try to keep it quite cool. Yes, that's all.